December 23, 1941. On a small coral atoll in the Pacific, the American outpost of Wake Island falls silent. The battle is over. The U.S. garrison has fought bravely, resisting wave after wave of Japanese assaults for 16 brutal days. But now, out of ammunition and out of hope, the surviving Marines and civilians are forced to surrender. Among the captives are civilian contractors, men who had come not to fight, but to build. They were there to construct runways, fortifications, and supply depots for the U.S. Navy. But when war arrived, they picked up rifles, fighting side by side with the Marines. Their courage delayed the Japanese advance, but their reward was grim. Many of those civilian workers would later be executed by their captors. The tragedy sent shockwaves across the Pacific Command. In Washington, D.C., one man took particular notice. Rear Admiral Ben Morrell, a brilliant yet unorthodox naval engineer, was haunted by the news. The death of those civilian builders proved something brutally simple. In a world at total war, there could no longer be a separation between the man who built and the man who fought. That realization would give birth to one of the most extraordinary military units in modern history, the U.S. Navy Construction Battalions. The world would come to know them by a shorter, prouder name, the Seabees. Admiral Morrell understood the Navy's problem better than anyone. The Pacific was vast, dotted with tiny islands, coral reefs, and volcanic ridges. To win, the United States would need to leapfrog across thousands of miles, building airfields, harbors, and bases faster than the enemy could destroy them. But civilian construction crews, as Wake Island had proven, were too vulnerable. They weren't trained for combat, yet they worked in the heart of war zones. The solution was radical: train construction men to fight, give the bulldozer a rifle, make the builder a warrior. On December 28, 1941, just 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Morrell sent his proposal to the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks. Within days, it was approved. On January 5, 1942, the Navy authorized the creation of its first construction battalions. By January 17th, the first units were already forming. They would carry the motto Construimus, Batuimus, we build, we fight. The Seabees were born. From the beginning, they were unlike any other unit in the armed forces. The average recruit was older 30 or more and came from civilian trades. They were carpenters, electricians, welders, plumbers, crane operators, and surveyors. Some had spent their lives on construction sites, others came from steel mills, shipyards, or small-town workshops. They weren't teenagers eager for adventure, they were professionals answering a call. As one recruiter joked, "We don't need kids who want to play soldier. We need men who can build an airfield and defend it too." Their physicals were lenient, their experience invaluable. The Seabees could take apart a bridge, rebuild it under fire, and still be standing when the shooting stopped. They carried hammers, rifles, and a sense of humor that became legendary. Their training began at Camp Allen, near Norfolk, Virginia. Later, larger bases at Davisville, Rhode Island, and Port Hueneme, California became hubs of activity. The men learned military discipline, combat tactics, and engineering under pressure. They drilled with rifles by day and poured concrete by night. They practiced amphibious landings with bulldozers and built mock airstrips in the mud. When they shipped out, they carried both tools and weapons. They were not support staff, they were a frontline force. Their first test came quickly, in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal, 1942. The Marines had taken the island, but their hold was fragile. Henderson Field, the airstrip that kept the entire campaign alive, was under constant shelling and bombing. Every night, Japanese aircraft cratered the runway. Every morning, the Seabees rolled in, shovels in hand, to repair it under fire. They worked waist-deep in mud, sweating and bleeding while shells burst around them. One of them, machinist's mate Lawrence "Bucky" Mayer, became a legend when he refused to abandon his post as bombs fell, continuing to operate his bulldozer to clear debris for landing planes. His courage inspired the men around him, proof that these builders were as brave as any combat soldier. By the time the battle for Guadalcanal ended, the Seabees had built, rebuilt, and saved Henderson Field dozens of times. Without them, the island might have fallen. The Marines had a saying, "If you can't get it done, call the Seabees." From that point forward, the Seabees were everywhere. In the jungles of the Solomons, the heat of the Marianas, the coral sands of Tarawa, the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, wherever the US advanced, the Seabees led the way. They built airfields on coral, docks on lava, and hospitals in swamps. They blasted through mountains, drained marshes, and created roads where none existed. Often, they built while under direct enemy fire. In one extraordinary incident on the Treasury Islands, Chief Machinist's mate Aurelio Tasso was operating his bulldozer when Japanese soldiers charged his position. With no weapon at hand, Tasso turned his bulldozer into one. He raised the blade, advanced at full throttle, and crushed the attackers beneath the machine. It became one of the Seabees' most iconic tales, the story of the builder who turned his tool into a tank. But their ingenuity went far beyond courage in the moment. The Seabees were engineers and problem solvers. They created pontoon bridges and floating docks that could be assembled in hours. Their inventions became vital to the success of operations like D-Day, where Mulberry Harbors, massive artificial ports built from Seabee designs, allowed Allied forces to offload supplies on the beaches of Normandy. Even Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, later admitted, "The Allies' ability to build, repair, and maintain supply routes faster than we could destroy them was a decisive factor in our defeat." The Seabees weren't just fighting a war, they were building victory itself. In the Pacific, their contributions were staggering. Between 1942 and 1945, over 325,000 Seabees constructed more than 400 bases, 111 airstrips, 441 piers, 700 square miles of roads, and 2,500 miles of runways. They built hospitals, mess halls, and warehouses from the Philippines to Okinawa. They often built in conditions so brutal that normal construction would have been impossible, yet somehow they made it look easy. Their bulldozers became symbols of unstoppable progress. One general famously said, "Give me Seabees and bulldozers, and I'll win any island in the Pacific." But they weren't just building with steel and stone, they were building morale. Their presence on the front lines reminded Marines and soldiers alike that no matter how isolated the battlefield, America's industry had followed them. One of their most ingenious contributions came in the form of flame and armor. At Camp Lejeune, Seabees and Marines collaborated to mount flamethrowers onto Sherman tanks. These flame tanks would become a terrifying weapon in the Pacific, capable of clearing bunkers and caves that cost thousands of lives in conventional assaults. When those tanks rolled onto the black sands of Iwo Jima in 1945, they turned hopeless stalemates into breakthroughs. Behind them came more Seabees, paving roads, building makeshift docks, and repairing landing craft even as artillery fire rained down. On Iwo Jima, the cost was immense. Many Seabees were killed or wounded, but they refused to stop. They built the road up Mount Suribachi that allowed the Marines to plant the flag, one of the most iconic moments in American history. Few realized that behind that flag stood the sweat, courage, and sacrifice of the Seabees. When the war finally ended, their legacy took on a strange twist. On the island of Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides, thousands of tons of equipment were deemed too costly to ship home. Bulldozers, cranes, trucks, millions of dollars in machinery all lined up along the shore. The Seabees were ordered to dispose of it, so they did by driving it into the sea. As they watched perfectly good machines vanish beneath the waves, some wept. That stretch of coastline became known as Million Dollar Point, a symbol of both the waste of war and the scale of their achievement. But the Seabees' story didn't end in 1945. Their skills were needed again in Korea, in Vietnam, and beyond. In the frozen desolation of Antarctica, they carved out McMurdo Station. In the heat of Vietnam, they built airstrips and schools for local communities, blending combat engineering with humanitarian aid. Even in modern conflicts, from Iraq to Afghanistan, the Seabees continue to serve, building bases, bridges, and relief shelters wherever they are needed. Their motto, "We build, we fight," remains unchanged. Today, more than 80 years after their founding, the Seabees stand as proof that strength is not only measured in firepower, but in resilience, in the power to build, to repair, and to endure. They were ordinary men, welders, farmers, carpenters, who became extraordinary by refusing to see a difference between construction and courage. They turned the tools of peace into instruments of survival. They proved that bulldozers could be weapons, that runways could win battles, and that no matter the chaos of war, creation was still possible amid destruction. They built the world that victory required. And long after the guns fell silent, the world they built still stands. They were the Seabees, the builders of victory.